Welcome to the Old Man's Corner. Pull up a chair and a cup of coffee and come on in. Welcome this morning. I'd like to speak a little bit today about small hometowns and neighborhoods. Where I grew up in a small town in Kansas, we had, in the neighborhood I grew up in, there was a small grocery store that sat on the corner there. It was called the Laundry Nook, and it was run by an older couple, and it was just about a half a block away from my home. So often we could go over there as kids, especially, and buy things. They had a laundry system set up in there as well as a little store. So we could go over there and buy like our candy, like I think most everybody remembers those little like plastic or tasting, little whistles or Coke, little bottles of Coke type bottles, or the plastic tasting little mustaches and that type of thing. They had a lot of those, or little, waxy things that you could bite it open and it had some type of liquid in it. They also had a pop machine over there. That was the only pop machine around our neighborhood there, so we could also go over there and buy pop in there. They had ice cream. They had all kinds of, they had little, all kinds of things. If you needed something in an emergency, there it was. It was probably a little more expensive than going to the bigger store, but it was pretty nice and pretty convenient, and we as kids could always run over there. We get a little money, we could always run over there and buy this or that and not have to go too far away from home even. But we spent a lot of time over there buying things, They just had convenience. It was like a convenience store, but it was an old time convenience store. And it was a big asset in our lives that time. Not too far away, probably, 4 or 5 blocks away was Albertsons. Albertsons was more like it was a store, but it was like a warehouse type thing, because you could walk in and it was, there were just little displays set up all through there, and they did have a butcher shop at the back, and you could wander through there and pick out what you wanted, and then take it to the front and check out. But it wasn't like today's, all these big refrigerated things and all the different aisles set up. You just wandered in. A lot of it was produce. He did a lot of produce there. He had his own, they had their own trucks that they would drive up to like Colorado to get fresh apples and things like that, and bring them back. So he had like 4 or 5, trucks that set out there that they used to go and pick up fresh produce. You could walk in and you could smell the food in there. I mean, it was, and they had, like I said, the butcher shop towards the back, and you could smell that even. And it was kind of amazing. It was one of those things that kind of stick with you, because it was, the aroma stuck with you, and the fact that most of the stuff was really fresh. And when you walk back out, it was attached to the back of the fire station there. And as you walked away around the side of it and towards the back, they had like a delivery area out the back, and they always had the back door open, so you could always smell the smells coming through there. They had it was interesting just walking by the place. You could smell these things, and that was a fond memory of mine. And right across the parking lot was a Code Candy Company, and they were the candy distributors for the area, and they always had the back doors open there. And I don't know, I was tempted several times. You can walk by there and you see all that candy and stuff stacked up in there, and it was a warehouse, so there wasn't very many people around, so it was tempting sometimes as a kid. We also had we had Irving School over there. It was, I don't know, it was about 6 or 7 blocks away. And that's where I went to elementary school. And across the street from that was a place called Flowers Grocery. And this is where my dad had an account set up. So when we went to school, when we got, either before or after school or during our break there, we could run across the street there to Flowers Grocery, and it was a mom and pop grocery. And it was just a little tiny place, and they had all these, and they also had, fresh cut deli meat and things like that. And we'd go there, and my dad had a 50-cent allowance back then. That was pretty good. That could get you an apple and a bottle of pop, or, a donut and a bottle of pop, or some candy, that type of stuff. And he'd put it on our account, and then my dad would pay that account whenever he got paid. There were some very good people. I enjoyed them, and we could sit out front as well. But they had little candy machines in there, bubblegum machines, and they did this thing where they had striped and spotted balls. And if you put your money in and you won a spotted ball, you got 5 cents worth of candy, and you just give it back to them. And if they got a striped ball, then they had these little trolls as gift up there, one of those little troll dolls, a bunch of them across there, and you could get those, trade it back in and get those, or you could trade that in and get a bottle of pop, and they had one of the little box pop machines where had the little, they just opened the top and all the pop was in there. They had a pop one time there that I really enjoyed. It was called Pomac. Well, eventually they quit making it because I guess it was made with apple cider. I guess that's why I like. But they found out that it was fermenting on the truck, so it was kind of giving people a little high, so they ended up having to stop making it altogether. But we went there as children, and spent a lot of time over there in that neighborhood. It was a daily thing for us when we were in school. So we had various places in town there that we could go to that reminded me of the old days and the neighborhood. And of course, I mentioned before, we had places like up towards Main Street. They had the burger station. It was right off Main Street. Had some of the best burgers, and I think I know it's still there. And it had some of the best hamburgers, and we used to go up there all the time and get hamburgers and stuff like that. Up on Main Street, though, they had the old, at the time, I was growing up as a kid, they had Woolworths, and some of my sisters worked there behind the counter. They had TG&Y, and they worked there also. They had various places, they had Alcoa, which was and then a supply store, and they had a feed and seed store that was right next to the theater up there. I used to go up there all the time just because you'd walk in and it had the old hardwood floors, the high ceilings, and all that stuff, and just the smells in there. They were just so memorable because of all the feed and seed, and they carried birds like canaries or things like that in there that you could purchase as well. And I remember going up there just to wander through. It was just amazing at the time. They had an old Dillon store there on Main Street. They had this parking lot beside it that sometimes the local bands and stuff would go set up out there and give a free, a free concert. And people could go down there and dance and stuff like that. And it didn't cost anything, and it was right there on Main Street. And we enjoyed that a lot. And then over by Irving School again, we had the Armory, and there'd be bands that would show up over there. I guess they'd rent it, and then of course, sometimes it's free, but sometimes they charged you, like $1, and you can go in, and it was a large enough area where you could go in. There'd be a lot of people in there, and they'd have the local bands play. And I remember one of them that I went to was called King Midas and the Mufflers. That was very interesting. But there were a lot of good times in those in our little small town. We had things to do, things that we could go and do. And, besides just growing up as a child there, I had friends and neighbors that we could interact with, and it was just very enjoyable. And then going to the schools, for a small town, there are a lot of schools there. I went to Irving through most of my elementary, but I also went to Webster and to Lowell schools there, and they had other ones there too. They still had Whittier, and they had Bryant. They had all those schools there, as well as the high school at the time. At that time, the high school was the junior high and the high school, so it wasn't really called the middle school. It was called junior high and high school, and it was all in the same place. And it was a magnificent building. It was like 3 or 4 stories tall, and the gymnasium was up on one of the top floors over there. And we used to go up there a lot and for the indoor sports, and then right across the street was that open field, which they did a lot of football practice at over there, where we in the neighborhood used to go over there and play ball and stuff like that, like on the weekends and stuff. And that's where they also had what we call the burning of the V, when they were going to be playing football games and stuff. It was called the victory thing, and they'd burn the V, and everybody would come over there and stand around it at night, and it was nice. It was interesting, and we learned a lot of social skills, or community social skills, where people got together and interacted. These are just some of the things I wanted to share with you today, because I had them on my mind. If you've done some of this stuff, if you had a small town or whatever, and you grew up with this type of stuff, and had some local places that you attended quite frequently, and things of that sort, share those with us. Leave them in the comments, and we'd be glad to hear those stories. We can get them out there and let people know that these small towns in USA are some of the greatest things that you could ever experience. Well, I just want to put this out, so I love you, and I will talk to you later. Have a great day.